Alexandr Wang might be the tech industry's best kept secret. The company he founded as a teenager, scaleai, is the engine that makes AI a reality for companies like Microsoft, Facebook, OpenAI, Nvidia, and even the US government.
The latest is scaleai, announcing a new funding round today, raising $1 billion at a valuation of nearly $14 billion.
His success with scaleai led Alexandr to the pinnacle of the American dream, becoming the world's youngest self-made billionaire at just 24 years old. But a lot of people are shocked when they find out that this tech prodigy, someone who's been dubbed the next Elon Musk, wouldn't even exist without hundreds of thousands of exploited human workers making pennies a day in digital sweatshops. So how does he get away with this? And how does he plan to use this tech for world domination? This is the dark tale of Alexandr Wang, the world's youngest billionaire who would stop at nothing in pursuit of success. From the day he was born in 1997, Alexandr Wang was immersed in a world of science and technology, being raised against the backdrop of the famous National Research Lab at Los Alamos, New Mexico, the same place where Robert Oppenheimer developed the atomic bomb in the 1940s. Alexandr's parents, both immigrants from China, worked as physicists developing cutting-edge technology for the US Air Force. Being the youngest of 3 children, Alexandr felt fierce competition over his parents' approval. People who knew Alexandr from a young age saw that he was pushing himself to the limits in pursuit of academic achievement, with one colleague saying, "Alexandr needs success the same way he needs oxygen." And another childhood friend, Scott Wu, revealing, "Competition was sort of our love language." But Alexandr seemed to thrive in this melting pot of pressure and competition, showing off his extraordinary skills in both math and science. By the age of 14, he was already competing for major prizes in national math contests, regularly going up against teens much older than himself. He also had a deep love for debate, traveling around the country for debate matches against other elite prep students. But above all, he had a natural gift for coding. And from an early age, Alexandr was already planning to take the startup world by storm. As early as the 9th grade, he kept a Google Doc full of business ideas and notes for his future tech empire. So when high school in Los Alamos didn't prove enough of a challenge for Alexandr, he went to Silicon Valley and put his expert programming skills to use. At just the age of 17, he scored a coding job at a software startup named Adipar. But only a few months later, Alexandr had already moved on to a new role at Quora, the well-known question and answer website, only this time he was managing an entire engineering team. But not everything was perfect in Alexandr's life. He failed to achieve his first lifelong dream of getting into Harvard University. And even though he did get accepted into MIT, one of the most prestigious math and science colleges in the entire world, his crushing rejection from Harvard made Alexandr so resentful of the idea of additional education that he decided to skip going to college altogether. So Alexandr continued on at Quora, but something felt off. He was quickly realizing that he didn't fit in there either. In what became a viral post on Quora's forum, he described himself as having imposter syndrome in Silicon Valley, being too young to relate to his coworkers, with all of them being at least several years older than Alexandr was. But when he tried to hang out with local college students, he found himself to be light years ahead of them in his career path, making it even more difficult to connect, admitting, "I fit imperfectly between 2 worlds." With his social life imploding all around him, Alexandr began analyzing hundreds of different startup companies around the world. He and his longtime friend Scott Wu would dissect the way that these early-stage businesses were run, how key decisions were made, and what qualities made the best business leaders. Those deep dives into the business of tech would soon pave the way for Alexandr's future startup success. But at that moment, he was burnt out by the light speed advancement of his own career and needed a change. So in 2016, he decided to leave his management role at Quora behind so that he could head to MIT.
So the big reason I went back to school actually was to study machine learning. So I was at Quora. It was a very machine learning driven company, but I didn't have that strong an academic backing. And so I went back to MIT to really study this more deeply.
And it was here, in one of the finest educational environments in the entire world, that Alexandr took on an entirely new approach to learning. He became immersed in the school's hands-on software engineering culture.
And so it's a very, building focused, hacker, tinkering kind of culture. Much more so than an academic culture or sort of research oriented culture, which I found incredibly inspiring.
Where students were more focused on experimentation, building, and tinkering with software projects than the traditional academic and research focus that Alexandr was used to. And when Alexandr took that experimental approach while trying to solve a simple problem with his roommates, it led to an unexpected light bulb moment that would change the course of AI forever. Alexandr's roommates were constantly stealing food from his fridge, and he hated it. Growing up with two other siblings his whole entire life, Alexandr was used to having battles over his belongings. So he devised a software solution to inform him when he was running low on food and if anything seemed out of the ordinary with how much food he was eating every week. Meaning, it would be able to let him know if someone was stealing food from his fridge without asking. Alexandr did this by installing a camera inside of his refrigerator and using artificial intelligence to track the amount of food that was left at any given time. He also wrote code that got his food tracking system up and running. But then he ran into a massive problem.
I wanted to build a camera inside my refrigerator that would tell me when my roommates were stealing my food, and learned pretty quickly that was an extremely difficult task because, again, there was no data to work off of. There was nothing to base these algorithms on top of.
And that's when Alexandr experienced what he called an aha moment. It was at this point he realized that in order for AI to perform more complex tasks that required human perspective, that it needed massive amounts of high-quality data, images, and infrastructure to give it enough data points to make accurate decisions.
AI, I realized, how do you empower the college dorm room developer with just incredible AI technology? And data was really the first step of that.
Which was perfect timing because AI was the hottest new development in all of tech. And Alexandr had an idea that could take him far beyond anything he ever jotted down in his Google startup doc. So after only a year of school, Alexandr dropped out of MIT, determined to make his name in the wild, wild west of AI. But at age 19, he would still face a lot of hurdles before launching his own company. You see, he had the vision of just how powerful AI technology could become, and he knew that this new industry would need access to reliable data in order to reach its true potential. But he wasn't quite sure how that idea translated into a full-fledged company yet. So he told Lucy Gao, a product manager he met from Quora, about his idea.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I want to make education fun for everybody. I'm 19 years old. I go to Carnegie Mellon. I'm double majoring in computer science and human-computer interaction.
And she immediately agreed that he was onto something. Realizing Lucy's design skills perfectly complemented his own programming talents, Alexandr asked her if she was interested in teaming up. But Lucy's design experience wasn't his only reason for pursuing her as his business partner. No, Alexandr had an ulterior motive as well. He knew about Lucy's impressive resume, one topped by the prestigious Thiel Fellowship Award, an extremely competitive title handed out by PayPal's founder and former CEO Peter Thiel to only about 20 people every year. Thiel had become one of the driving forces behind Silicon Valley's investment world with his Founders Fund, a venture capitalist firm that launched many of the world's most well-known tech companies today. With the potential of a power player like Peter Thiel in Alexandr's corner, his dreams of heading up the hottest new startup were a lot closer to reality. And he was right, because Alexandr and Lucy were quickly accepted into the extremely competitive Y Combinator program, an exclusive startup accelerator headed by OpenAI's CEO Sam Altman that provides young entrepreneurs with money, mentorship, and incredible networking opportunities for the 2% of applicants that it accepts. But there was just one problem. Alexandr and Lucy couldn't come up with any ideas that got people excited because they hadn't figured out how to turn Alexandr's aha moment from college into a company. And so they moved on to other ideas. Their first attempt at Y Combinator was to create what they described as a class pass for clubbing. And while this app idea may have helped college kids make the most of their entertainment spend on a random Saturday night, it was hardly the type of game-changing technology that top VC firms were looking to spend money on. So they gave up on this project early on and pivoted to a brand new idea, an AI assistant named Ava. But this idea again left many of their mentors disappointed and underwhelmed, because there were already a number of similar AI projects under development across the industry. And Ava didn't offer any notable advancements over these competitors that were far ahead of Alexandr and Lucy in getting to market. No one at the Y Combinator program, not Sam Altman, the other investors, or even fellow participants, saw a lot of promise in what Alexandr and Lucy were doing, with the coveted $500,000 in startup funds seeming destined to go to someone else. But Alexandr was far too competitive to consider giving up. He kept going back to his aha moment with the refrigerator experiment from his college days, knowing there was something there. Alexandr believed that if AI was ever going to reach a level of brainpower that could actually compare to humans, then it needed massive amounts of quality data to help it run properly.
The question is not, is a model better than a human unassisted from a model? The question is a human plus a model together going to be able to produce better output than a model alone? And I think that'll be the case for a very, very, very long time. That humans are still, human intelligence is complementary to machine intelligence that we're building.
He also realized that the projects that he and Lucy had worked on up to this point were all concentrated on the same customer-facing applications that nearly every other startup in the AI space was competing for. But Alexandr thought to himself, what if instead they focused their project on the infrastructure that fed all of these AI apps being developed the fuel they needed to perform? He knew from his college experiment that AI algorithms were dependent on human perception, and that categorizing the data from specific pictures, text, audio, and other inputs would be a huge market if AI technology grew in popularity. But what does this look like? Well, let's take pizza as an example. In order for AI to know what a pizza is, it needs a human to initially show it a picture of pizza with a correctly labeled name at the earliest stage of training that AI model. This concept is called labeling. And the more correctly labeled pizzas an AI sees compared to images that it knows are not pizza already, the better it learns to identify what a pizza actually is. Alexandr recognized that this data labeling concept was just as important to AI as food and water is to humans. And almost no one was working on ways to make data labeling better, faster, or less expensive. He realized that this presented him and Lucy a huge opportunity to build a data labeling startup company.
NVIDIA was already a very clear leader in building compute for these AI systems, but there was nobody focused on data. And it was really clear that over the long arc of this technology, data was only going to become more and more important. And so in 2016, dropped out of MIT, did YC, and really started Scale to solve the data pillar of the AI ecosystem.
Ironically, though, the necessary infrastructure supporting the most complex technology in human history didn't require genius technical talent in order for it to work. Instead, data labeling was a job that nearly any human could do at its most basic level. It didn't take much education or expertise to be completed, but it did need a sizable workforce that could be put together quickly. So he brought the idea to Lucy and they came up with their third startup idea, scaleai. Scaleai? That can't be right. How did that P get in there? Let me check my notes. Oh yeah, that's right. It's because it wasn't an app or an AI at all. Instead, they were offering a service that provided humans on demand to help AI developers complete mundane tasks like image recognition, data categorization, auto transcription, and any other raw inputs AI needed to learn effectively. It was an odd project for Alexandr, given his extraordinary coding gifts. Remember, this was the guy who was in charge of a full Quora technical team as a teenager. And at first, it looked like another startup idea that had gone wrong for Alexandr and Lucy, because few people truly understood the value of Alexandr's vision for his company. Except one man, Dan Levine, a young investor at Excel, a notable venture capital firm out of California. Levine was so excited about this idea that he wrote a check to invest in Scale before Alexandr and Lucy even presented their new company at Y Combinator's demo day. And so, a 19-year-old Alexandr suddenly had a big reputable backer and industry attention that he'd been craving since he left MIT behind. Only now came a bigger challenge. Scale needed to become a real business. Everyone who had ever encountered Alexandr knew he was a gifted programmer. But as scaleai took root, his other great talent started to enter the spotlight. Only Alexandr didn't even know this secret talent was hiding inside him all along. Because his abilities to learn and adapt quickly, analyze trends, and deliver on his vision in order to solve customer problems also made him an incredible salesman. Ever since childhood, Alexandr always had an eye on the biggest tech trends in Silicon Valley.
I was really impatient as a kid. I think I always wanted to be learning more, or I always wanted to be doing more, always wanted to sort of be accomplishing more.
And now, in 2017, when he and Lucy founded Scale, he was able to take advantage of it. Because Alexandr correctly identified a problem in one of the hottest tech markets at the time: self-driving cars.
What we've done is built a platform that allows these companies to get the data they need to be able to build these algorithms in a safe and reliable way, and then they use the data to build their self-driving cars.
Tech leaders from around the world were all declaring that autonomous driving was going to change the way that we live.
Than 2,000 self-driving cars are on the road in California. Most have a test driver inside who can take over when needed, but hundreds of cars have no one in the front seat as they make deliveries and shuttle passengers.
Except none of them realized there was a key technology missing that would end up holding it back. Because without properly labeled data, the AI in self-driving cars wouldn't be able to tell a plastic bag blowing across the street from a child running into the road, a scenario that would be disastrous for this new technology. So after studying the situation closely, Alexandr concluded that getting access to quality data that was labeled correctly could make or break the entire autonomous vehicle sector.
Without the data that we're able to provide to these companies, they actually wouldn't even be able to build algorithms that could perform in any manner that's safe or reliable.
And to add to all his excitement, Alexandr realized there was not a single company out there focused on labeling 3D images for the radar, cameras, and sensors that self-driving cars produced. So he made it his mission to show scaleai could do it. But in order to truly build Scale's platform, they would need an army of humans with access to good computers to sift through all the raw data efficiently and effectively. That way it could be labeled properly. And the continuous amount of data and still images being produced by self-driving technology meant that it was next to impossible to pay a decent rate in America to handle this task. So they explored outsourcing the actual data labeling work to people in developing countries. And they soon found their solution in a Southeast Asian country known as the Philippines. This country was a perfect fit for Alexandr because it had a huge gaming and computer culture with plenty of internet cafes to serve as hubs where people could work from. Plus, the cost of hiring a Filipino data labeler for a day was less than Alexandr's daily cappuccino in San Francisco. Running the early operations out of their apartment, Alexandr assembled a small team of aspiring techies that went to AI conferences and helped him pitch scaleai's capabilities from a laptop that they carried around in their backpacks. Tech industry pros were amused to see scaleai's team making rounds at these conferences, when it looked like they'd be a better fit at a college freshman mixer.
I'm Alex. I'm CEO, co-founder of Scale. We launched about a year ago in June 2016, and I'm here sort of to talk about what Scale is and talk about a lot of our decisions while building it.
But quickly, the Scale team turned those same tech veterans into admirers when they scored their first contract for an autonomous delivery company called Nuro and never looked back. Alexandr quickly leveraged Scale's position as the only company capable of meeting the labeling demands for self-driving technology. Then he combined that first mover advantage with the elite connections he and Lucy made in Silicon Valley. Soon, every company who had a stake in autonomous driving wanted Scale as their data solution. And this includes startups like Waymo and Cruise, but also Wall Street juggernauts like GM and Apple.
What are you doing for Waymo, Cruise, and Uber?
Yeah, so what we've done at Scale is built the data platform for AI. So AI is really built on top of data, and these algorithms require billions and billions of examples of labeled data to be able to perform in a safe or reliable way.
Scale was the model of overnight success, just like you'll be after subscribing to this channel. Transforming from a scrappy startup working out of Alexandr's apartment to attracting serious investors in just a few months' time. To keep up with all the demand, Scale had to grow rapidly. They needed qualified people to handle tech and operations in San Francisco, but they also had to bring on thousands of data labelers to process all the raw material that was constantly coming at them from their new clients. Alexandr and Lucy had momentum and looked primed for a massive breakthrough. But ScaleAI's success would bring serious problems, and some people started to see Alexandr Wang in a much different light. With every new client Alexandr signed up, ScaleAI needed more and more people to handle the new workloads coming in. To recruit new data labelers and manage their expanding headcount, Alexandr instructed his team to create a subsidiary company they called RemoTasks, with its sole purpose to handle the mundane data labeling and organization of images from ScaleAI's clients. With Alexandr's schedule packed full of client pitch meetings, Lucy took over operations at RemoTasks as its workforce continued to multiply rapidly. And when looking at RemoTask's website today, a few things are incredibly clear. First, you're met with a very straightforward proposition. Do tasks, get paid, it's that simple. The tasks are supposed to be easy to learn, completed on your own time from home, and most importantly, workers will receive fast and secure payments for their jobs completed. The idea of becoming a tasker, RemoTask's name for their gig worker labelers, sounded extremely appealing to digital workers in developing countries. But for many, this simple promise was broken. At first, taskers expected that they could make as much as $10 per task, and in the Philippines, that could form the basis for a very livable wage. With some taskers reporting, they were able to earn payments approaching $300 per week. But only a couple of years later, the taskers that we interviewed informed us that the company was now just paying a few pennies per task. However, the bigger problem for these workers was being able to secure enough tasks that would actually provide a full-time living for them. In fact, when having one of our team members sign up to work on RemoTask ourselves, we were asked to complete a number of training courses, only to be put on an indefinite hold in a queue for availability to work. Regardless, RemoTask's workforce continued to grow. So why did Alexandr expand his existing workforce? Well, it all started when ScaleAI put together a devious plan for expansion. Initially, the tasker workforce was concentrated in pretty much just the Philippines. But then Scale brought RemoTasks to India, Venezuela, and the rest of Latin America. Alexandr and his team realized that expanding RemoTasks into different countries across the globe would create intense competition for these jobs amongst taskers worldwide. And they knew these desperate workers would fight in a race to the bottom, which would allow RemoTasks to exploit them, knowing full well they didn't have enough jobs to match the demand from all these countries. And just as their villainous plan predicted, the wages plummeted as naive taskers agreed to less and less favorable terms just to try and put food on their tables. The way Scale was operating RemoTasks wasn't all that different from the predatory manner in which industrial factory owners of the 1800s mistreated their employees. That is, before labor laws were created to protect workers. But in developing countries starving for American dollars, the laws heavily favor these large corporations. Despite all this, Alexandr continually pushed Lucy to grow RemoTasks. He would need taskers to perform at the highest level if they were eventually going to take ScaleAI beyond the niche of self-driving cars and aim for the tech world's most powerful clients like Facebook, Microsoft, and OpenAI. But it became increasingly difficult for Lucy to devise and implement protocols that could keep up pace with the massive influx of taskers. RemoTasks started renting out spaces in the Philippines, providing facilities with high-speed internet. That way, taskers could work more efficiently. But these workspaces offered very little else beyond a decent network connection that would allow the taskers to complete their objectives. The offices were barely furnished and overcrowded, with taskers working elbow to elbow in shifts that lasted many hours. A far cry from the flexibility and freedom that these workers signed up for. It got so bad that activists even started calling the locations digital sweatshops.
So on the topic of digital sweatshops, workers engaged in data annotation, often referred to as crowd work, face multiple risks and challenges. They face payment discrepancies, including delays or cancellations of payments, and are widespread issues for workers on platforms like Remote Tasks, which is owned by scaleai. These workers are exposed to substandard labor conditions, including extremely low rates of pay and lack of labor rights and protections.
And to make matters even worse, some of these struggling workers stopped being paid altogether. In a chilling Washington Post article, they exposed scaleai's disturbing pattern of unjustly delaying and canceling payments rightfully owed to taskers over the course of its years of doing business. Taskers were routinely at the blind mercy of Remote Tasks leadership, as each project required a lengthy and confusing approval process to be checked for fraud before it was marked as complete. And worse yet, many of the workers were left in the dark about the status of these projects with no concrete answers as they tried to get their jobs done. Payments were regularly withheld due to this poor fraud detection system as workers waited on their bosses' to complete the review of these disputes. And as Remote Tasks continued to grow, more and more workers began to complain that their payments had been canceled without any notice, due to a rejection at an unknown point during the approval process. But did Remote Tasks make things right with their taskers? No. Instead, Remote Tasks responded to these complaints by ruthlessly booting helpless and frustrated workers out of their platform.
There I am plugging away. I'm making good money, close to $80 a day or whatever it was. And all of a sudden I get booted for no reason. And I asked about it and I didn't get an explanation, but it's like, I don't understand. Like, I didn't use ChatGPT. I know my language in these is fine, but all of a sudden I went from making like close to $80 a day to absolutely nothing, and there was no projects available to me.
Word quickly spread from the community of taskers that if you spoke up about your pay, your account would likely be deactivated. These intimidation tactics were extremely effective. Remote Tasks knew that the vast majority of its exploited workforce had nowhere else to turn to find another paying gig. This meant taskers fell in the line and continued to feed data into the scaleai beast. And while all this chaos was happening around his company, Alexandr was in a completely different universe, far removed from the defenseless Remote Tasks workers that were actually powering his company to new heights. In fact, at this time during 2019, scaleai was in the middle of securing $100 million in funding that would bring the company's overall valuation to $1 billion. Major Silicon Valley investors like Peter Thiel's Founders Fund and Excel were placing bets that Scale would become the next tech unicorn. Even as reports of mistreatment and unpaid wages surfaced, scaleai's clients continued to turn a blind eye as well. Perhaps the data Scale was feeding them was too valuable. Or perhaps Alexandr was able to eliminate any fears by assuring them that Remote Tasks was always improving and open to their task workers' feedback. Still only 22 at the time, Alexandr was showing the rest of Silicon Valley that his ability to court clients was arguably some of the best skills in the industry. Everyone wanted to work with scaleai, with only a couple of unhappy clients complaining that scaleai wasn't as good as what they were selling. Alexandr was the face of Scale, a rising celebrity not just in the AI world, but across all of tech and finance. The media was constantly marveled at his incredible success and youth. Meanwhile, Lucy was struggling to keep Remote Tasks out of the news. It's easy to see how all the damaging PR and worker complaints could have started to weigh on her conscience. These two long-standing friends who founded scaleai together now look to be on completely different paths within their own company. And this clash of their beliefs was pushing their relationship and everything they worked for together to its final breaking point. With Lucy entrenched in operations, no one really knew if Alexandr was fully aware of the worker situation at Remotasks, or if he was simply choosing to ignore it. But once the scandals inside Remotasks started to surface, Alexandr turned all of his frustration towards Lucy, criticizing her for not keeping the lid on these problems and letting them get out to the public. Lucy explained that the only way to fix the situation was by doing the right thing, taking care of the workers and ensuring they would be paid what Remotasks had promised them. Alexandr wanted to quiet the Remotasks problem as quickly as he could, as allegations of worker abuse could easily derail the model that had made scaleai a huge success. But this presented another big problem for Alexandr, because in order for him to get the big money investors and large company valuations that he desperately craved, he needed them to believe that scaleai was a technology company first. So whenever speaking to potential clients, he completely minimized the contributions of the labelers who made Scale's success possible. To Alexandr, making the sale was all about showing tech people the superior way his platform processed all the data that these labelers provided. From his point of view, the labelers were farm workers picking fruit and milking the cows, while Alexandr was the Michelin star chef. And it became apparent that this chef was not willing to tell the world about his dirty little secret. I mean, just see how Alexandr dances around this simple question about training their taskers.
How do you work with your taskers and how do you train them to annotate huge amounts of data in partnership with your customers?
Yeah, and so a few things here. One of the fundamental beliefs that we have at Scale is that there's sort of like a few resources that go into producing really high quality machine learning systems.
Because scaleai's customers only interfaced with the platform that Alexandr and his team engineered. They never had any contact with the actual data labelers or the Remotasks team themselves. And if these allegations against him went public, it would put all the focus on the labeling side of their business and sabotage everything Alexandr was selling to his clients and major investors. Though the situation was touchy, it could quickly devolve into a disaster. scaleai had a sneaky advantage, because Remotasks was set up as its own business entity, and there was no public connection on either of the two companies' websites, which was a saving grace for Alexandr at this critical moment, as he was predicting $121 million in revenue in 2020, which made Scale's valuation soar and contracts were rolling in. Almost no one outside of scaleai realized that Remotasks was part of the business, so the scandal remained an internal conflict within the confines of their San Francisco offices. Still, that didn't make it any easier to deal with, because scaleai's US team was primarily made up of progressive, idealistic techies fresh out of college, and the thought of working for a company that owned digital sweatshops didn't sit well with them. Alexandr started to feel the pressure from the lower ranks in the company, who were questioning why he would allow these types of abuses to happen. Lucy continued to urge him to make changes, and a growing number of Scale employees joined her in these calls to adjust the company's culture. But Alexandr wasn't going to let anything get in his path to make scaleai a success, so he took swift action. As CEO, he held firmly to the belief that this was his company, and he saw Lucy as a threat who could take everything down with her poor management. As Alexandr thought about it, he acknowledged that she had some good ideas at the start and was a capable designer, but he believed that Lucy simply didn't have the skills, intelligence, or grit it would take to run a business that Alexandr wanted to build into a $100 billion tech titan. So he took his concerns to Dan Levine, their first angel investor who funded scaleai all the way back during its humble beginnings at Y Combinator. Levine, now on the board of directors at scaleai, was widely known as one of Alexandr's biggest supporters. The tech veteran didn't want anything to stand in the way of Alexandr's vision for scaleai, and he agreed that the best way to deal with the Remotasks problem, along with the growing rebellion inside scaleai, was to get rid of Lucy Gao. So in 2018, in nearly the same way Remotask silenced and removed disgruntled gig workers, Lucy was fired by Alexandr. It was a bitter end to the friendship of these two co-founders that had launched the company together just a short time ago. Upon her shocking departure, Lucy only released a short generic statement about her exit from one of the most hyped tech startups in the last decade, explaining her reason for leaving as a division in culture and ambition alignment, and saying of Alexandr, "We had a difference of opinion, but I'm proud of what scaleai has accomplished." With Lucy now gone and Dan Levine backing him all the way, Alexandr took absolute control of scaleai. He wanted to cement his status as a Silicon Valley visionary, become the next Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, and he had everything he needed to make that a reality. Except that getting rid of Lucy didn't reduce the calls from his employees demanding culture change at scaleai. It only made them more skeptical of Alexandr and what some would say was his authoritarian leadership. In fact, this can clearly be seen in reviews of Alexandr and Scale on Glassdoor.com. If you talk to Alexandr Wang, you'd be convinced scaleai was soaring to incredible highs. But if you had a similar conversation with scaleai's employees, you would hear a completely different story, one that Alexandr didn't want anyone to know. To the outside world, Alexandr Wang was an incredible sensation, a self-made tech tycoon who was intelligent, charming, and still incredibly young. He was making regular media appearances and popping up on all sorts of lists like the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for enterprise technology and the Times Next 100. But inside of Scale, his employees saw Alexandr in a completely different light, especially after Lucy Gao's ouster. His desire for success seemed like it would never be satisfied, showing the dark evolution of the drive and determination he exhibited as a star student in middle school. The once teen prodigy at Quora, the same shy kid that couldn't fit into Silicon Valley, was gone forever. Instead, Alexandr was a power-hungry CEO looking to shape his world however he saw fit. But things were starting to get tough, and Scale was in danger of facing its first real crisis. You see, the autonomous vehicle sector was falling apart, thanks to years of tech companies overpromising and under-delivering within the industry, which meant investor money started to tighten up across the overall self-driving car market. This development left scaleai looking for a parachute to shore up the $120 million revenue projection that Alexandr made for 2020, all while its core customer base started canceling contracts and even closing down their operations. Ultimately, Alexandr significantly missed on his $120 million revenue prediction when scaleai finished the year making just $70 million instead due to lack of fall off in the self-driving tech market. Desperately needing new clients, Alexandr realized that he needed to change Scale's data labeling capabilities in order to attract new customers in the emerging trends within the tech industry. So he moved his focus directly towards generative AI. And in order to do that, he needed his team fully on board. But getting buy-in from his team was becoming more and more challenging every single day, because many of Scale's employees were completely disheartened by the lengths at which Alexandr was willing to go in order to achieve his ultimate goal of turning scaleai into a $100 billion business that dominated the world. They believed his moves were getting more and more cutthroat as Alexandr micromanaged their every decision. To some of his employees, he appeared to take on the persona of an early 1900s industrial tycoon, similar to J.D. Rockefeller or J.P. Morgan, completely focused on gobbling up as much power as he could, instead of being the idealistic leader of a new promising tech community focused on changing the world for good, the type of persona that they originally signed up to work for. Alexandr realized he had to change that perception if scaleai was going to keep growing at the same rate that it previously had. He couldn't risk his company's reputation when it needed to recruit top talent for its US operations. And while he had proven to be a skilled salesman when it came to pitching clients, now he would have to take those same exact sales skills and work to convince his own employees that he had their best interest in mind. He started this by hosting regular company-wide town hall meetings where everyone was strongly encouraged to voice their opinions or ask any questions they wanted about Scale. Alexandr even challenged his employees to hit him as hard as they could with the questions that they wanted to ask, in part because he was so confident that he could come out on top in any debate. And unsurprisingly, concerns about scaleai's involvement in digital sweatshops came up almost immediately, as did broader questions about the data labeler's mental health and the types of content they would be exposed to as Scale expanded into other industries. At one of these town hall meetings, an employee even asked Alexandr if Scale would ever consider turning down a contract, like with a company with a smart toilet project, due to the types of disgusting content that the data labelers would be forced to look at in order to train the client's AI. This seemingly silly question ignited a fierce debate. Many Scale staffers argued it would be unethical to make people sit through that kind of repulsive imagery every single day, especially when there were concerns popping up all around the tech industry about the mental health of content moderators who had to monitor disturbing subjects like hate speech, homicide, or even child pornography. Alexandr promised that scaleai would never get into the business of content moderation, but almost everything else seemed like it was still on the table. He aimed to convince everyone at Scale that even the labelers would benefit from any client that Scale worked with. Alexandr argued that AI enables a collective experience of as many people as possible.
We really believe that it requires sort of the collective expertise and collective knowledge of as many people in the world to really empower and enhance these models.
And at another one of these town hall meetings, the question came up about whether scaleai would be working with the military, which was significant since Google had recently declined to renew a military contract because of employee objections. Alexandr blew off the question, simply saying, "We will not help build killer robots." But in the weeks that followed that town hall meeting, scaleai announced a 5-year contract with the US Department of Defense, a deal originally worth nearly $100 million. Scale would supply the data and algorithms to help the US military develop its AI systems for surveillance on the battlefield. Shortly thereafter, Scale opened up an office in Washington, D.C., prompting complaints from Scale's employees at the next town hall meeting. When pressed about his previous promise that Scale wouldn't get into military applications, Alexandr told his team that the stakes had changed, and they were a lot higher than he initially realized when he made that pledge, making an argument to his team that he has since repeated to US government officials, making statements like data is the ammunition of AI warfare.
But in the AI arms race, we're already behind. From a technological perspective, China is already ahead of the United States in computer vision AI, and in large language models like ChatGPT, they're fast followers. In terms of military implementations, they're outspending us. Adjusted for total military budget, China is spending 10 times more than the United States.
Few employees inside Scale were satisfied with Alexandr's reasoning, but with his Los Alamos roots and his own parents' involvement in supplying science for the military, he wrote off his employees' concerns as being naive. And it was in that moment that many were left wondering if these town hall meetings were really just a place for Alexandr to double down and force everyone to conform to his beliefs. But that didn't stop him from pushing ahead and continuing to grow his relationship in military contracts. By 2023, scaleai had upped its contract with the US military to almost $250 million. And today, scaleai is a mainstay in the US government's inner circles, with Alexandr becoming an outspoken proponent of bringing the latest developments in AI to all departments within the military, taking pride that his company could make such a strong impact to help the US maintain its leading position on a global stage.
While I find it shocking that most American AI companies have chosen not to support national security, I do hope others join us. We must fight for the world we want to live in. It's never mattered more.
This sharp turn towards more militant and nationalistic attitudes might have looked like a significant departure from the normal mild-mannered Alexander, but other observers would claim that this was just another example of his chameleon-like nature and the opportunistic approach that he deployed in order to make scaleai a success. But there was one thing that no one could deny. This change in the direction of the company was working from a financial perspective. As Alexander rode the wave of momentum with the military, he promised investors that this was only the beginning of the next step in evolution for scaleai, because he also had his eye on scoring some of the biggest names in tech as scaleai clients. And in 2021, Alexander turned those ambitious claims into an additional $325 million in funding, making scaleai's valuation soar to a remarkable $7.3 billion.
And fast forward to today, we're over 600 people strong, raised over $600 million, most recently at a $7 billion valuation, and work with incredible firms like Microsoft, PayPal, Square, Pinterest, Etsy, NVIDIA, and the whole lot. So it's been an exciting journey so far.
And it was at this moment that Alexander became the world's youngest self-made billionaire at just the age of 24 years old. And in order to support scaleai's projected growth and new valuation, he had to make good on his promise to attract major tech clients. But internal tensions with scaleai employees were still left unresolved, and the accusations of digital sweatshops were still smoldering, a threat that could burn him at any moment. Alexander took a hard look at himself in the mirror and knew he had to fix this problem. But the solution he came up with wasn't what you would expect. Always a student of Silicon Valley, Alexander quickly realized that AI was going to be the next technology that would take the tech world by storm. And his company, Scale, was still a top name in data labeling, which made them perfectly primed to take advantage of the opportunity. Companies like OpenAI, Facebook, and Google were all looking for human input to help train their chatbots so they could give more natural responses.
We've worked with OpenAI since 2019, and all the way back to GPT-2. And I like to say it's been a 4-year overnight success. And it's been incredible to just see the past 6 months of progress in artificial intelligence,
Alexander quickly used his connections to win them over. And soon, all of the top AI companies in the world were scaleai customers.
Our data foundry today powers nearly every leading large language model, including those from OpenAI, Meta, Microsoft, and NVIDIA.
But this presented a problem. In order to support large language learning models like ChatGPT, Alexander would need to bring on labelers that were quality native English speakers. Plus, he still had to clean up the messy employee situation that he had both at home and abroad. And to do that, he simply decided to clean house. Without any notice, Scale pulled remote tasks out of entire countries, abruptly locking workers out of the platform in Kenya, Nigeria, and Pakistan. Remotask also stopped accepting new signups across most of the rest of the world, claiming that it had drastically altered its operations due to an enhanced security protocol. Now, some would argue that this was the result of its work related to the US military, but speculation was rampant that it was actually a move made to intimidate the remaining workers into sticking with the platform and keeping quiet about their pay, for fear that they wouldn't want to be the next ones to get locked out and completely cut off from their only source of income. scaleai then opened a company called Outlier in the United States, an additional subsidiary that basically did the same exact labeling work as the taskers at Remotask. But this subsidiary would give Alexander the native English speakers that he needed in order to secure substantial generative AI contracts, along with the critically important work that his company was doing for the US government as well. The labeling companies were restructured to operate under several other umbrella companies, including entities like Higher Art, Higher Digital, Remote Workers US, and Work From Home. This move could easily be interpreted as a clear attempt to further distance Remotask away from Scale in the public view. But the abuses of Remotask's contracted employees were starting to become open knowledge, with the Wall Street Journal and Oxford University both documenting its predatory labor practices. In fact, on Oxford's Internet Institute's labor standards test, Remotask scores a miserable 1 out of 10, by far the worst rating in the industry. Outlier, operating very similar to how Remotask did initially, made promises that wooed US professionals with earnings up to $1,600 per week. The platform attracted gig workers with PhDs, lawyers, doctors, and many others, which was a perfect way for Alexandr to sell Scale's labeling services to the largest American tech firms who wanted to improve their AI models. But not long after Scale landed contracts with OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, and Facebook, that the American gig workers at Outlier started experiencing a lot of the same problems as the workers at Remotasks, including a massive surge in competition for jobs, dramatically reduced rates, and even getting locked out of their accounts with zero notice. Meanwhile, in early January 2023, Scale cut 20% of its US workforce, a surprise to many because it came during the midst of the AI boom and was less than 2 years after they received $325 million in funding. Alexandr cited a dip in gross profit margins as the reason to lay off workers from scaleai's San Francisco office. But it begs one to wonder, how many of these workers who got let go were the same ones who challenged Alexandr over digital sweatshops and the contracts that he secured with the Department of Defense? Despite all of these apparent struggles, Alexandr launched another new fundraising round in 2024, aiming for a staggering $1 billion investment, which would almost double scaleai's valuation to nearly $14 billion.
You've just announced a European HQ in London. You're valued at $14 billion. What's that like?
But Alexandr's reputation was quickly changing around Silicon Valley. His original underdog story of a young prodigy beating all the odds started to morph into another cautionary tale of a young tyrant who controlled his company with an iron fist. Some were even skeptical of the lofty $14 billion valuation that Alexandr sought for scaleai because he kept mutual funds and institutional investors out of the last funding round, meaning there was no one to be able to cross-check the accuracy of the valuation or the amount of revenue that scaleai was bringing in publicly. Eventually, Alexandr did raise his $1 billion, but it was a tough sell that took several months. Onlookers around the industry thought the scaleai was stumbling, making an awkward transition from scrappy startup to battling with tech titans, especially when some disgruntled self-driving auto clients came out of the woodwork saying that they were finding a lot of errors in scaleai's data, many of which were quite obvious, like mislabeling windows as pedestrians. In his drive to become a billionaire tech leader, some critics would accuse Alexandr of just being a fast talker that would say anything he thought his clients wanted to hear. But this was creating a dangerous pattern for Alexandr, which soon presented him with the most challenging decision he had ever faced in his young career as a CEO, forcing him to pick between scaleai's most important customer and the biggest opportunity of his life. As Alexandr Wang's influence continues to grow, it's putting him further and further into Silicon Valley's limelight, with the young CEO earning tons of fans across tech circles around Silicon Valley. And today, he's even parlayed that fame into becoming a true tech celebrity, with millions of followers across social media, while making appearances at the world's most epic parties, like the Met Gala, alongside his movie star girlfriend, all while hanging out with celebrity investors like Orlando Bloom and Jared Leto. It truly seems like he is living the American dream, with fame, fortune, and riches beyond his wildest dreams, all at the grasp of his hands. And this is in large part because Alexandr has refused to let anything get in his way of his ambitions. But what has often been lost in his vision is empathy for the reality of the people that actually keep his company running. He shredded his relationship with his friend Lucy Gao in order to take complete control of scaleai, where he continuously allowed exploitation and abuse to take place within his digital sweatshop business model, despite reputable journalists, activists, and even his own employees calling him out, making decisions that some in the industry find highly questionable, which has alienated him from many, including people inside his own company. And no decision made this more clear than the recent conflict with his most important customer. Because even though scaleai's $250 billion deal with the US Department of Defense led to a notable change in Alexandr's public statements in support of the US military, it didn't stop him from trying to sign a deal with the enemy. Because at the same time that Alexandr was opening up a Scale office in Washington, D.C. to better support his clients across the US military, he was actively in talks to sign one of the biggest contracts in scaleai's history to supply TikTok with data services. This extremely popular social media platform has been heavily criticized by many US leaders due to its abusive nature in collecting US citizens' data to benefit the Chinese government, essentially spying on the US through its video app. So it would seem that Alexandr is a champion of keeping America ahead of China in the race for global AI dominance, except when it comes to making massive amounts of money off of a huge Chinese tech company that some US government officials consider a danger to the American people.
Let's say it's an interesting dynamic. You know, he comes away from a trip to China with, you know, one view of, you know, why it's important to support the US mission, and then, you know, pursues a contract with a company that he had visited while in China.
And despite significant pushback from executives in scaleai's US government business unit, Alexandr still attempted to maneuver around this extreme conflict of interest in order to push the deal through with TikTok, only finally pulling the plug on the contract after his Washington team notified him that bringing on TikTok as a client would significantly damage the relationship between scaleai and the US military. So that leads one to ask the following questions. Does Alexandr Wang actually believe what he's saying when he talks about the importance of using AI to help keep the US leading the way as a world power?
The AI race and the AI war between US and China, I think, is one of the most important issues of today. We took out a full-page ad on the Washington Post on Tuesday saying that, you know, America must win the AI war.
Or is this simply a cunning sales strategy from a man that will say or do anything in order to be successful? And if you thought Alexandr's ruthless quest to dominate the tech world was shocking, then you need to see this video here on the man secretly controlling all of your tech.